You've become convinced that you have somebody in your life that likely does not have your best interest in mind. At least you're beginning to become convinced of that. What do? How do you set boundaries? We will discover that next on Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Hello everyone, I'm John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We are in a series on grief and loss, an extended series on grief and loss, looking at some of those issues that will keep us stuck as we are trying to heal. Most people assume, and understandably so, that grief and loss has to do with death and dying. It certainly has to do with that, but that's only about 20% in my estimation. The rest has to do with what's going on in the here and now. And if I am to heal from the past, I have to get to a point where the present is calm, or at least I can feel peace and rest on the inside. So in order to do that, I have to be able to look at what's going on in my life, assess the things that I have control over, and begin to make changes. With the folks that I work with professionally, most of the time, whether they are aware of it or not, a lot of the issues they are dealing with has to do with boundaries and difficulty establishing boundaries. And difficulty establishing boundaries probably with people in their past, the people that are still with them in one way or another. So we're in a series now, series within a series, looking at issues of being able to identify people that are not beneficial, that we actually should not be dealing with. So we've looked at, and you can go back into the repository of past programs. You can find those on SurvivorSupport.net or on my YouTube channel. If you would like to ask some questions, we're actually going to do a question and answer program in a couple weeks from now. And the best way to submit those questions, if you have any, on any of the information that I have presented this far, is to either go on to SurvivorSupport.net, submit a question that way, or even in one of the text boxes under the YouTube videos. Each week, I will be posting a 30-minute segment, part 1 and part 2 of each of the programs. So there's a growing repository of these programs available in an easily accessible form on SurvivorSupport.net under podcasts. And what we've done thus far is we have looked at some of the issues that go into keeping us stuck. We've looked at the indicators of unresolved pain. Some of those are buttons and triggers, stress, and inability to be able to be still on the inside. That's a pretty good indicator that something is going on. Certainly also with the majority of the psychiatric issues or mental health disorders, the vast majority of those, as far as anxiety and depression, the majority of that has to do with things that are going on in the present, some of which may have to do with the past. We looked at what causes some of the most profound pain. We looked at the impact of being raised by a narcissist, the hindrances to healing, questioning whether or not you're seeing things clearly, and the myths, easy for me to say, the myths or the lies that hinder healing. Indicators of being stuck emotionally. So if you're emotionally stuck, there will be indicators of that. One indicator, for instance, is if you have compulsive behaviors. One in particular that I specialize in is emotional eating. If you tend to eat out of emotions, if you're happy, if you're frustrated, sometimes if you're sad, but certainly happy and frustrated. If you find yourself going for food, then something's going on. Here's another topic we covered, the importance of discerning the reality of pigs in my life. And we have been camping on pigs, not literally camping on pigs, but we've been camping on the subject. We've been starting to go in depth into what is a pig. Now, we're not into name calling here. We're actually reflecting ancient literature, primarily biblical literature. We're looking at the New Testament, and in the Old Testament, we're drawing upon some of the terms that were used by Jesus. He said, do not cast your pearls before swine. He also said, do not give what is holy to dogs. Peter used those exact two references. Paul spoke in terms of fools. That is not the modern day rendering of it. A fool is someone who has morphed into a profoundly selfish and, quite frankly, dangerous individual, a professional grade manipulator. And Solomon himself, the wisdom of Solomon in the book of Proverbs references dogs, that we should not give important things to dogs, people in our lives, because they will return back to their original state, and especially in the form of pigs, that a washed pig will return to the mud. The three things that will prevent me from accurately discerning pigs, we looked at that. There are some things that will cloud my intuitive vision, so we looked at some of that. And we provided an assessment last time to assess for degrees of piggishness. We called that the warthog assessment. So hopefully you've been able to become convinced that if you do have selfish people in your lives, you become convinced that they're there and that they are pigs. Meaning, if somebody meets the criteria of being a pig, we need to call a pig a pig. Again, we're not calling names. It may be tempted to call them a pig. Don't do that, because that's not kind. Remember, we're not to be nice. We are to be kind, though. And kind is also useful. Okay, so the first place to start is becoming convinced. And hopefully, over the past number of weeks, we've laid out the criteria, made the case for certain categories of people are actually pigs. And Jesus said, do not be around them. Do not cast your pearls. And again, pearls are what is important to you. We are a steward of our time, effort, energy, and resources, and our emotional reservoir and trust. So we need to know, we need to be able to discern who we're dealing with. But once I've become convinced and once I've discovered that I have a pig on my hands, what do you do? What do I do once I've become convinced that I'm dealing with a pig? Well, I have to recognize, and I probably will then naturally recognize, that I have to do something about it, because the reason a person is a pig is by choice, over time, with a lot of effort, and they don't intend to stop on their own. They will keep going. By the time somebody reaches the level that they fit the criteria of a pig, they have morphed into a profoundly selfish individual, and you don't know if there's any hope. You don't know if they can come back to being a reasonable person. You don't have any control over them. All you have is control over yourself, your own attitude, and the decisions you make, and one of which will be whether or not to begin to make some change. And once you see a person clearly, and once you realize they are able to make decisions, and so they are making a decision to remain as they are, then you'll realize very naturally that it's time for a change. So, what do you do when it's time for a change? You first have to understand what's involved in that. So, what are the key principles in implementing change? First is, change has to take place within you first. It has to be deeply rooted. Think about the three little pigs. Remember, there were 3 types of houses. There was straw, there was stick, and there was a brick. And the big bad wolf, that's interesting. No, we actually, in that story, we could flip it around. The big bad wolf is actually the pig. But that's funny, I didn't anticipate saying that. But okay, think about the 3 houses, the construction material, and what happened. Both were sort of homes, both had boundaries, as it were, both had limits, but only one withstood the onslaught of the selfish wolf. Well, we could call him a dog. We're not to take what is holy, because dogs are within the canine breed, somewhere in there, I would imagine, though biology is not my strength. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to become convinced. So it has to come from within me. If I am not coming from a place of internal strength, then it doesn't matter. Then it's really not me setting boundaries. It is me attempting to hope that the other person will change. I have to become convinced that the person is doing what they're doing by choice, that they are capable, and they're not going to stop. So I first need to, if I'm going to implement change with that person, is I have to become convinced that it's not my imagination. We talked about how selfish people will go after somebody's intuition. Their favorite phrase, some of you remember from previous podcasts, is they'll say, well, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. Really? No, it is exactly what it looks like. Rare is the time that it's not when it comes to selfish people. You have to become convinced that it's not you, that you are not the problem. We actually looked at a self-assessment or self-inventory. We kind of reviewed step number 4 in the 12 steps, but we did that through 1 Corinthians 13. That can be found under the 2-part series on how big of a pig. You have to become convinced that it's real, that this is really happening, because the selfish person will do what? They will try to convince you it's all in your mind. It's all you. You must be overly sensitive. I don't know. You just have some issues. Oh, come on, get over it. Oh, they've got a million ways to convince you that it's actually you. You are the problem. The alcoholic, the classic kind of phrase is, well, you know what? I could stop drinking if I wanted to. If you'd stop getting all over my case, I'd stop. So you're the problem. No, you're not the problem. The problem is them. They're manipulating you. You have to be convinced that it's real, that there really is a real problem. Unfortunately, by the time somebody has allowed a pig to be in their life for years, their intuition has become vacated, has become silenced, and so they don't have the internal mechanism to really know that what they're seeing is true. So they're always second-guessing themselves. So this process will bring about, if you do the process of healing properly, it will bring back your intuition. So you will know, you'll have the ability to test reality despite what someone tells you. You also have to know, in order to implement boundaries, you have to know that it's necessary to protect yourself and others. One way to check is, how's it been going? And what happens if you don't take action? It will get worse. You have to be sure that it's gone on long enough and that it's going to continue. Unless you're sure of that, you will not be able to implement boundaries. You will not have the internal resolve, and so you'll construct a house before the big bad wolf comes knocking. You'll do straw or sticks. We need you to have rebar in your spine. You need to know what is true. Okay. You need to know that it's going to continue, and you need to know that you have the right. You need to know that you have the right to begin to make change or implement change, and that you have permission. We've looked at some of that, especially divine permission. We'll talk about that in a moment. You also need to know that you have responsibility. You have responsibility to implement change. It's not just for your own comfort. It's not just for your own peace. All of that is very true. As a matter of fact, let me speak to the permission aspect. God has given you time, talent, effort, ability, resources. Those are your pearls. You're going to invest your pearls somehow during your time on earth. The question is, where are you investing them? And is it a wise investment? We will be called to give an account for our time, effort, energy, and resources and relationships. If I squander those, the Lord's not going to take a lot of excuses. He wants me to be responsible. So I have permission, I have the right, and I have the responsibility, especially if you have kids. You have a responsibility to them, to protect them, to clarify reality, because if you don't, they will grow up thinking that it is okay to treat people the way the big pig, the way the wolf is acting. If you have a son, he's learning how men should treat women or how they're able to treat women. If you have a daughter, you're modeling for her or them. You're modeling what a woman should and can and will be able to accept in the kind of behavior. It is not right. It is irresponsible to give the impression that abuse and that emotional abuse and any kind of abuse is okay. Again, it takes wisdom to begin to discern how one approaches this, but you have to become sure, because a child growing up in that kind of home will quite probably spend the rest of his or her life, unless they really spend time working through it, they will be handicapped by this. It will be a ball and chain that they will drag into the future, and your future son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and then grandkids. Now we're talking multiple generations will be impacted and influenced by the choices you make. And you have a spiritual mandate. God expects you to stop giving your pearls to swine. You will not get brownie points. He will not say, well done. He will probably say, I'm making this up, but he'll probably say, what part of this didn't you understand? In order to make a change, as far as some of the key principles in being able to bring about change, I have to understand that change cannot be dependent, but easy for me to say, change cannot be dependent upon the other person's agreement. That is one of the key principles of boundaries. It is not a boundary. If I'm setting a boundary, or what I think is a boundary, if I need the other person's cooperation, it is not a boundary. To be able to implement change, I have to be able to do so, probably with the other person not being very keen on it. Remember the big bad wolf? We're now putting boundaries on them. And what does he start to do? Well, he's going to huff and he's going to puff and he's going to make all sorts of racket and commotion. They do not take boundaries kindly. Okay? Change will not be received well and will likely be resisted. Change will be stressful. This is some of the key principles that I need to understand. Change will likely be stressful and will likely involve loss, especially if I'm dealing with a professional grade pig. Again, now kind of shifting away from the Three Little Pigs analogy. If I'm dealing with a professional grade manipulator, then it's going to get ugly in some fashion. Why? Because they've morphed from being a sociopath to a white-collar psychopath, or what Romans chapter 1 calls a reprobate mind. They will, in one way or another, they will say it's game on. Okay, if you really fear implementing change, the reason you fear it is because you know in one way or the other, it's going to get kind of ugly. Now, it doesn't have to get ugly on your end. Okay, it shouldn't. That's not being responsible in how you implement these things. Okay, I lost my. There we are. So change does not require me, and it's not a true boundary if I get down in the mud with the pig. Okay. Actually, a true boundary is implemented in a polite but firm way. Okay. But as far as getting ugly, meaning they're going to go to the mattresses, I guess in one of the movies it talks about. Change will be stressful and involve loss, and change will involve doing hard things. It's going to be extremely hard. But what's the alternative? To continue as things are. The changes will involve you finally becoming honest, and that will be how boundaries are implemented. In one way or another, you're going to have to convey and communicate that the old order of things is now different. And there are ways to implement that, but it's going to finally take you becoming honest. The changes will involve the nature and the dynamic of relationships. And this is so crucial. Right now, if you have a relationship with someone that is a professional grade manipulator, a professional grade selfish person, a pig, then you have what I call a one-up, one-down relationship. Now I've got my hands here. What is a one-up, one-down relationship? Think of the scales of justice, those old-fashioned kind of scales. You have a relationship that is out of whack. Okay? It's no longer even. It's no longer based upon mutual respect, mutual value, mutual appreciation. What's happened is the selfish person, we'll make this guy the selfish person, he is thinking more about himself than anybody else, or certainly about you. So as his estimation rises in his own mind, what happens to his estimation of you? By nature and by default, he's thinking more about himself than you. He's starting to justify and rationalize what he's doing and saying. It happens over time. Sometimes it's very dramatic, but the smarter they are, incrementally, they're going to begin to make it all about them. When that happens, they are taking their stuff, their responsibility, what we call their knapsack, they are taking their responsibility and putting it on you. The act of that is emotional irresponsibility. Emotional irresponsibility. Now, what do I mean by their responsibility? Okay, again, we have an imbalance in the relationship. The responsibility they have comes out of Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, and they know it intuitively, which is this. Each man, that comes out of Galatians, and that's part of this. Each man should carry his own load, but bear one another's burdens. So carrying a load, when I dump a load is something I never should let go of, because that comes out of Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, doing what is right, just, and fair. So let me repeat that. The scales of justice kind of situation, as far as equal respect and value and appreciation, it changes to the extent that I care more about me than about you. And if I choose not to do what is right, just, or fair, so now I am rewriting Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, I'm violating my conscience. So I'm no longer doing what is right, just, or fair. That is my responsibility, regardless. When I used to work in the prison system on psychology staff, as I would work with the different men, all sorts of gradations of offenses, I would have them in group, and I would talk about this. There's a program called Thinking for a Change. Great title, and sometimes they need that. But for the majority of them, it's not their thinking that needs to change, because they can tell you why they did what they did if they're ever going to be honest. It is their heart that needs to change. What needs to change about their heart? They need to have a lower estimation of themselves, so ego has to be put to death, quite frankly, and they need to start listening to their conscience. It is one's conscience that will tell them what is right, just, and fair. The extent to which I violate my conscience is the extent to which I will not do what is right, just, or fair. And as I used to tell those men, gentlemen, it's not that you didn't know the difference between right or wrong. It's that you didn't care. And then I would ask them this: is there ever an excuse to not do the right thing? Is there ever an excuse not to do what is just? How about what is fair? Fair actually takes into consideration the circumstances and the context. No, it always is up to me to make sure I'm doing what is right, just, and fair. To the extent that I don't, here we go with the scales again. To the extent that I do not do what is right, just, and fair, as I'm thinking more about me and putting myself first in an unhealthy way, meaning ego is growing, then I will start to do what is not right, just, or fair by taking my responsibility to do that. And that has to do with how I'm going to treat somebody. And I start to dump my stuff on that person. I can change the nature of the relationship into an unhealthy and a hurtful and a toxic one. The more it's out of balance, the more it's one up, one down. Now I have a master-slave situation. This person is going to do what I'm telling him to do. The one-up person is going to work the one-down person. Why? Because it benefits the one-up person. So if the one-down person ever wants to change this dynamic to make it less hurtful, how about make it a mutually beneficial relationship based upon respect? If the one-down person wants to make a change, how are they going to get the one-up person to make that change? Because by this time, the one-up person is really benefiting. So you're assuming that the one-up person has a conscience any longer. You're assuming that the one-up person is going to listen to his conscience. If he had listened, or she had listened to their conscience, it wouldn't be this way. It is clear by the time you have such a wide disparity of respect, meaning disrespect, the pig is not brain dead. The pig knows it's happening. The pig actually derives a sense of satisfaction seeing pain, seeing discomfort on the person's face. That's the nature of a pig. So the one down person, the person being disrespected, the person that is being devalued, will have to be the one to make the change, or it's never going to change. That's why it comes down to us having to finally look at and become convinced that things have to change. So the goal of counseling then, as I work with folks, is to assess and reevaluate the scales, the amount of respect and value that they have in relationships, and inevitably, in one way or another, it's off kilter. And the way to get it back in line is for the one down person to take the stuff that the one up person has given them, has dumped on them, and to give it back. So the goal of counseling is everybody owning their own stuff, no more and no less. Everybody needs to carry one backpack. So I have to be able to discern. And you can have professional grade dumpers. We call those the people that will dump, and then the other people are the super duper pooper scoopers. Okay, so in order to make changes, I'm going to have to be able to start giving somebody back their knapsacks. I also have to be ready to understand that the changes will be unmistakable. If the person doesn't notice, then it's not a boundary. Trust me, by the time you have to do this, they will notice, because they also have a radar system, and we'll talk about that. The changes will be implemented out of your healing, not out of your hurt. That is crucial. You can confront someone, and part of what this will be about is confronting someone. And confrontation is not a knockdown, drag-out kind of situation. It is to place in front of. It is putting truth. It's speaking the truth in love. It's putting truth in a reasonable way, not nice, but you're going to be effective. You're putting truth in front of that person, and they're going to have to deal with it. So I have to be able to, and they're going to give pushback. So I have to be able to confront out of my healing rather than my hurt, because if I'm confronting someone, if I'm forcing an issue, as it were, and if it's not inside of me as far as the change, then I am dependent upon how the other person will respond. And remember the big bad wolf. They do not take kindly to having boundaries established. So if I need the other person to cooperate, I will never be able to implement boundaries. And I cannot confront too soon, because again, when the other person, and they inevitably will, when they do not agree, when they tell me I'm crazy, when they tell me I'm overly sensitive, when they tell me, you know what, everything was fine until you did what you did, and now look, you went ahead and you messed up a good thing. Everything was fine till you had to go and start finding yourself, or everything was fine till you got into therapy. I've heard that so many times. What'll happen is, if the person needs the selfish person's cooperation or agreement, they're done. Meaning the person trying to make the change will collapse, will come apart at the seams. And the more sophisticated the pig is, they will flip it on them. So better not start, right? Better not start implementing boundaries until you're really, really sure. And we are going to help you become really sure. And we will return on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you, in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation, or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.